Victor Patterson was 46 and worked night security at Columbia River Freight Systems in Portland, Oregon. Most people who saw him believed he was a quiet ex-military man whose best years were long gone. He drove an old 2008 Ford F-150, bought burnt coffee at the same Chevron every morning at 4:50, and carried his lunch in a faded gray cooler with a cracked handle. What nobody knew was that Victor had once led military intelligence investigations in Afghanistan. At 6:14 a.m., somebody hammered on his apartment door hard enough to shake the frame. Two Portland police officers stood outside. The younger one looked up, froze, and quietly said, "Captain Patterson, if you're watching from somewhere outside the U.S., comment your country and local time below. And if you enjoy stories where calm men let the truth do the talking, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story gets even heavier." Victor Patterson's apartment sat on the third floor of an aging brick building off East Burnside Street, 6 blocks from the Willamette River. The hallway always smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet glue. Most tenants kept their doors decorated with fake wreaths or football flags. Victor's door stayed plain gray all year long. Every weekday began the same way. 4:12 p.m. wake up, 4:25 black coffee, 4:40 shower, 4:50 Chevron station on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, 5:20 clock in at Columbia River Freight Systems. The routine almost never changed. The employees at the Chevron knew him as the quiet man with exact change. Medium coffee, 2 hazelnut creamers, no conversation. The cashier once asked if he ever took a vacation. Victor had looked at the lottery tickets behind the counter for a second before answering, "Not really." That was the kind of answer people remembered because it sounded like the end of a sentence instead of the beginning of a conversation. At Columbia River Freight Systems, Victor supervised overnight security for 3 warehouses that handled electronic shipments moving through Portland towards Seattle and Boise. The job mostly involved cameras, gate logs, and drunk truck drivers arguing about paperwork at 2 in the morning. Most of the younger guards thought Victor was strange. Not dangerous, not intimidating, just strange. He never missed a shift, never complained, never flirted with the receptionists, never joined conversations in the break room when politics or football started bouncing off the walls. He carried the same faded gray lunch cooler every night, turkey sandwich, apple slices, black coffee in a steel thermos, always the same. One guard named Tyler Jensen once joked that Victor probably had cash buried in the woods somewhere because nobody could live that simply on purpose. Victor had looked up from the security monitor and said calmly, "People bury things because they're afraid someone will take them." Tyler laughed awkwardly after that. Nobody really knew how to respond to Victor sometimes. There was something about him that made people lower their voices without understanding why. The freight yard itself stretched across nearly 12 acres near the river docks. Floodlights washed the asphalt in pale white. Shipping containers stacked 4 high-cast giant shadows over the loading lanes. Victor liked the quiet between midnight and 3 a.m. when the trucks stopped rolling for a little while and the radios finally calmed down. Silence never bothered him. In fact, he trusted silence more than words. At 2:17 every morning, Victor walked the perimeter fence with a flashlight and a small black notebook. He wrote down tiny details most people ignored. Loose hinge on gate 4, broken reflector near dock C, white Honda parked outside perimeter for 7 minutes, rainwater pooling near electrical conduit. Nobody at Columbia River Freight understood why he documented so much. But Victor documented everything. Every receipt went into labeled envelopes. Every vehicle service record got scanned onto an external hard drive. Every apartment maintenance request had a copy. Even his old Ford F-150 had two dash cameras installed, one facing the road and one facing the cabin. The truck had 247,000 miles on it. Rust around the wheel wells, the cracked taillight taped with red plastic film. The passenger door squeaked every time it opened, but the engine ran perfectly. Victor maintained things carefully, especially the things people underestimated. Natalie Brooks used to laugh about that. "You treat that truck better than most husbands treat their wives," she once told him. That had been during the first year they lived together. Back then, her voice still softened around him. Natalie worked at Evergreen Housing Initiative downtown, a nonprofit organization that managed low-income housing grants throughout Multnomah County. She spoke confidently, dressed sharply, remembered names instantly. People trusted her within minutes of meeting her. Victor had noticed that early. She could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with invitations to dinner. Victor could spend 3 years working beside someone and still know almost nothing about their personal life. Their relationship had confused people from the beginning. Natalie liked rooftop restaurants, charity galas, expensive wine tastings. Victor preferred diners where the coffee came in thick white mugs. Natalie talked through silences. Victor listened through them. Still, for a while it worked, or at least it looked like it did. By the second year, small changes began appearing around the apartment. Natalie started taking phone calls on the balcony even during winter rain. She changed her phone password after keeping it open for nearly 2 years. Sometimes she came home smelling like expensive cologne Victor didn't own. One night she asked him casually while standing at the sink, "How much did you save from the military?" Victor had been drying a plate. "Enough." "That's not really an answer." "It's the one I have." Natalie smiled after that, but the smile looked thin around the edges. After that conversation, she started asking more questions about his retirement account, about life insurance, about whether his military contacts still kept in touch. Victor answered very little. Not because he was hiding something, because habits formed over decades did not disappear easily, especially military habits, especially investigative habits. Victor had spent years learning that people often revealed themselves while searching for information. And Natalie had started searching. One Thursday morning in March, Victor came home after shift and noticed the bathroom mirror cabinet slightly open, 3 inches. He always closed it completely. Inside, the bottle of aspirin had been moved forward. Tiny detail, almost invisible. Victor said nothing. The next week, he noticed one of the kitchen chairs pushed farther under the table than usual. Again, tiny. Again, wrong. He started checking the apartment more carefully after work. Nothing missing, nothing broken. But things felt touched, adjusted, measured. 3 nights later, while putting leftovers into the refrigerator, Victor opened the junk drawer beside the stove. Then he stopped moving completely. The spare apartment key was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. Victor stared at the empty section of the drawer for several seconds. The refrigerator hummed softly behind him. Rain tapped against the kitchen window overlooking Burnside. His expression barely changed. But something cold settled behind his eyes. Very slowly, he closed the drawer again. Then he looked toward the hallway where Natalie's coat hung beside the door. And for the first time in months, Victor Patterson began to understand that somebody was preparing the ground beneath his feet. Natalie Brooks, understood something most people never learned. A believable lie was never built all at once. It was layered slowly, patiently, one small concern at a time. At Evergreen Housing Initiative, Natalie managed public outreach programs and tenant support operations across Portland's East Side developments. The office sat inside a renovated red brick building near Northwest Gleason Street, filled with exposed pipes, glass conference rooms, and motivational posters about community trust. People like Natalie there. She remembered birthdays, sent sympathy flowers, brought homemade brownies to staff meetings. When donors visited, she knew exactly when to laugh and when to lower her voice. By 38, she had built the kind of reputation that made people defend her before hearing facts. Victor noticed the shift long before he understood the shape of it. At first, it was just comments, small ones, easy to dismiss. During dinner at Serato Restaurant one Friday evening, Natalie stirred her wine slowly while speaking to another couple from work. "Victor's impossible to read sometimes," she said lightly. "I swear he could sit through a tornado without blinking." The others laughed politely. Victor kept eating. 10 minutes later, Natalie added another layer. "He's not mean or anything, just intense in this quiet way." Again, harmless on the surface. But the pattern mattered. A month later, at a charity fundraiser downtown, Victor overheard Natalie speaking near the valet station while she thought he was still inside. He checks everything she said softly. Doors, windows, receipts. It gets exhausting. Someone asked if she felt safe. Natalie paused before answering. That pause did more work than words ever could. Victor noticed it immediately. She wanted people to fill the silence themselves. That was smarter than making direct accusations. Victor drove home quietly that night through steady Portland rain, wipers clicking every 4 seconds. Natalie sat in the passenger seat, scrolling her phone while jazz music played low through the speakers. Neither spoke much. The silence between them no longer felt peaceful. It felt measured. 2 weeks later, Victor came home from shift and found Natalie asleep on the couch with her phone against her chest. The screen lit briefly when a message arrived. "Ryan had a great time tonight." Victor looked at the screen for less than 1 second. Then he walked into the kitchen and poured coffee like he had seen nothing. By morning, the message had been deleted. Ryan Mercer worked in your IT at Evergreen Housing. 34. Clean haircut, expensive watches, always smiling too quickly in photographs. Victor had met him twice. The first time Ryan shook his hand while maintaining eye contact slightly too long. The second time Ryan avoided eye contact entirely. Victor trusted the second version more, after that strange details began appearing more often. Natalie started taking photos around the apartment, not vacation photos, specific things, kitchen counters, door locks, the bedroom nightstand. Once Victor walked into the living room and found her photographing a cracked drinking glass near the sink. "What's that for?" he asked. Natalie smiled casually. "Oh, I was showing Amanda how clumsy you are." Victor nodded once. But Amanda did not know them well enough to care about a cracked glass. Another detail. Another thread. One Sunday afternoon, Victor returned from washing his truck at a self-service station near Sandy Boulevard. As he entered the apartment, he heard Natalie arguing quietly on the balcony. "No, not yet," she whispered. Pause. He won't react. That's the problem. Victor stepped inside loudly enough to announce his presence. The conversation ended immediately. Natalie walked back into the apartment, holding her phone against her chest. "Who was that?" Victor asked. "Work." Victor looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and walked past her toward the hallway closet. He never pushed harder once someone lied. People usually revealed more when left comfortable. That week, Natalie began sleeping farther from him in bed. Small physical distance. Barely noticeable. But Victor noticed everything. Tuesday night, she flinched slightly when he touched her shoulder while passing behind her in the kitchen. The reaction looked practiced. Not dramatic. Controlled enough to appear unconscious. Victor saw it clearly, and that worried him more than anger would have. At Columbia River Freight Systems, rumors started quietly. A guard named Melissa asked Victor one night if everything was okay at home. Victor looked up from the monitor wall. "Why?" Melissa shrugged awkwardly. "I don't know. I heard somebody say your girlfriend's having a rough time." Victor studied her face calmly. She looked embarrassed the moment the words left her mouth. That meant the rumor had already traveled farther than she realized. Victor simply returned to his paperwork. But internally, pieces were beginning to lock together. 3 nights later, he left work at 5:43 a.m. and drove home under low gray clouds hanging over the river. Downtown Portland traffic had not fully started yet. The roads felt hollow. As Victor parked outside the apartment building, he noticed something unusual. Apartment 3, B. Mrs. Alvarez, early 70s, always awake before sunrise. She stood near the mailboxes holding her small terrier against her chest. Normally, she waved immediately. This morning, she hesitated first. Then she walked toward Victor slowly. "You okay, honey?" she asked carefully. Victor closed the truck door. "Why do you ask?" Mrs. Alvarez shifted uncomfortably. "There were police here yesterday." Victor said nothing. "They asked if I ever heard fighting, and what did you tell them that you're quiet?" Victor nodded once. Mrs. Alvarez lowered her voice. "That girl of yours seemed upset." Victor thanked her politely and continued upstairs. But his heartbeat slowed into something colder now, more focused. Inside the apartment, Natalie was already dressed for work. Navy blazer, gold earrings, coffee mug in hand. She looked perfectly calm. "You're home early," she said. Traffic was light. Natalie walked over and kissed his cheek lightly. Victor smelled unfamiliar cologne again. Not his. Not new anymore either. Repeated. Consistent. While Natalie gathered her purse and laptop bag, Victor quietly observed the apartment. Everything looked normal. Almost too normal. The kitchen counters spotless. Living room cushions arranged precisely. Bedroom door slightly open. After Natalie left, Victor waited exactly 30 seconds before moving. Then he walked through the apartment carefully. No emotion, no rushing. The bedroom closet looked untouched. Bathroom normal. Kitchen normal. But when he entered the spare storage room near the hallway, he stopped. One of the cardboard archive boxes had been moved. Only a few inches. Most people would never notice. Victor crouched beside it slowly. Dust marks on the floor showed the original position clearly. Someone had opened the box recently. Inside were old military files sealed, notebooks, tax records, and external hard drives. Nothing appeared missing, but someone had gone searching. Victor closed the box carefully. Then he scanned the room one more time. That was when he saw it. Tiny scrape marks near the apartment lock. Fresh. Very fresh. Victor walked back into the kitchen silently and opened the junk drawer beside the stove again. Empty space where the spare key used to sit. He stared at it for several seconds. Outside rain hit the windows harder now. Traffic hissed through Burnside below. Victor slowly closed the drawer. Then he walked to the living room window and looked down at the street 3 floors below. A dark blue Honda Accord sat across from the building. Engine running. Ryan Mercer behind the wheel. The car pulled away the moment Victor looked directly at it. Victor watched the taillights disappear through the rain without changing expression. But somewhere deep beneath the calm, an old instinct had fully awakened. And Victor Patterson finally understood this was no longer suspicion. Someone was building a case against him. The pounding on Victor Patterson's apartment door came again. 3 hard strikes, precise, official. Victor stood from the kitchen table without hurry. The digital clock on the microwave read 6:14 a.m. Outside Portland, rain dragged thin lines down the apartment windows, while traffic moved slowly across Burnside Bridge under the gray dawn. Another knock. Victor crossed the apartment quietly. No panic. No confusion. Just observation. Before opening the door, he glanced automatically at the deadbolt chain lock and peephole angle. 2 officers stood outside beneath the flickering hallway light. Portland Police Bureau, full uniforms, rain still dripping from their shoulders. Victor unlocked the door and opened it halfway. The younger officer froze immediately. Not dramatically, just enough. His jaw tightened for half a second before training pulled his face back under control. "Captain Patterson," he said quietly. Victor recognized him at once. Daniel Ruiz, thinner now than he had been in Kandahar, older around the eyes, but still carrying the same rigid posture of a man who never completely left military structure behind. Beside him stood a second officer Victor had never seen before. Female. Early 30s, sharp posture, alert eyes. Her badge read, Officer M. Holloway. Daniel recovered first. "Sir," he corrected himself quickly. "Victor Patterson." "Yes." Daniel cleared his throat. "We need to speak with you regarding a complaint filed this morning." Victor opened the door wider. "Come in." Officer Holloway stepped inside first, scanning automatically. Standard procedure. Victor noticed the slight downward angle of her body camera. Brand new unit, the protective plastic still partially attached near the lower edge. Daniel entered second. The apartment looked exactly the way it always did. Clean counters, boots, a line near the door. Gray couch, no clutter, no alcohol bottles, no visible damage. Officer Holloway spoke first. "We received a report involving threats and possible domestic intimidation connected to this residence." Victor nodded once. "From Natalie Brooks." Neither officer answered immediately. That was answer enough. Daniel watched Victor carefully now. Not looking for aggression, looking for deviation. Victor knew the look because he had trained men to use it years earlier. "What kind of threats?" Victor asked calmly. Officer Holloway opened a slim notebook. "Miss Brooks alleges repeated intimidation, verbal threats, stalking behavior, and concern for her physical safety." Victor listened without interruption. She also provided supporting evidence. Holloway added. Victor looked at Daniel instead of her. Daniel avoided eye contact for a second. That told Victor more than the words did. The evidence looked convincing. "Would you consent to us taking a look around the apartment?" Holloway asked. Victor stepped aside immediately. Yes. No hesitation. No lawyer request. No outrage. That unsettled Holloway slightly. People accused of domestic threats usually did one of two things: explode or collapse. Victor did neither. As the officers moved through the apartment, Victor quietly observed details. Evidence bags already prepared. Search limited, but targeted. That meant Natalie had given them very specific information. Kitchen first, bedroom second, storage room last. Interesting order. Victor filed that away silently. Officer Holloway opened drawers carefully, while Daniel remained mostly near the living room area. Not passive, watching. Always watching Victor. At one point, Holloway paused beside the knife block in the kitchen. "One missing?" she asked. Victor looked over. "Utility knife," he said. "When did you notice?" "Didn't." That answer earned another glance from Daniel. Most people knew exactly when knives disappeared after accusations like these. Victor's lack of reaction created tension Holloway could not quite place. Then she moved toward the hallway closet. Victor's eyes followed once. Only once. Daniel noticed that too. The closet door opened. Inside sat cleaning supplies, folded jackets, and a plastic storage bin near the floor. Holloway crouched slightly, then stopped moving. "Officer," she said quietly. Daniel stepped closer. Holloway lifted a kitchen utility knife wrapped loosely in a gray dish towel, exactly where Natalie had described it. Victor's face remained still, but internally, a mechanism locked into place. Too clean, too exact. The towel itself was wrong. Victor never used kitchen towels in the hallway closet. Daniel looked at the knife carefully before placing gloves on. "Bag it?" he said quietly. Holloway slid the knife into an evidence bag while reading serial numbers aloud for body cam documentation. Victor listened carefully. Evidence seal 44791. Time logged 6:21 a.m. Officer, initials, correct. Procedure clean, good. Very good. Daniel finally looked directly at Victor again. "Miss Brooks stated you threatened her with this 3 nights ago." Victor spoke calmly. "I never touched that knife." Holloway's eyes narrowed slightly. Not disbelief. Evaluation. Daniel asked the next question carefully. "When did Miss Brooks last stay here yesterday morning? Does she still have access to the apartment?" Victor paused. "One spare key is missing. That changed the room slightly. Not dramatically, just enough." Holloway straightened slowly. "Did you report the missing key?" "No." "Why not?" Victor met her eyes evenly. "Because I wanted to know why it disappeared first." Silence settled for a second. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Far below, a garbage truck hissed through the street. Daniel remembered that tone. Victor used it overseas before briefings went bad. Calm, controlled, dangerously patient. Sir Daniel said carefully, "Miss Brooks also provided photographs of bruising and screenshots of threatening messages." Victor nodded once. She would. Holloway looked up immediately. "What does that mean?" Victor answered without emotion. "It means she prepared this." Daniel felt tension tighten beneath his ribs. Holloway's expression hardened slightly. "You understand these are serious accusations?" "Yes." "And you're saying they're false?" "Yes." Still no anger, No pleading, no dramatic denial. That bothered Holloway more than shouting would have. She had worked enough domestic cases to recognize emotional patterns. Victor fit none of them. Daniel stepped toward the kitchen counter. "Victor," he said quietly, "do you mind if I ask you something directly?" "Go ahead." "Why are you this calm?" For the first time, Victor's eyes shifted slightly. Not emotional, reflective, because panic destroys observation. Daniel stared at him silently. Same answer, same man. Kandahar flashed briefly through his memory. Dust storms, radio static, Victor Patterson kneeling beside a false intelligence report while mortar fire echoed outside concrete walls. Panic destroys observation. Victor had said it then too. Holloway interrupted the silence. "Based on the complaint and evidence recovered, we need you to come with us for further questioning." Victor nodded immediately. "Am I under arrest?" "Not currently." Victor reached for his jacket calmly. No resistance. No negotiation. As he slipped the jacket on, he noticed movement through the rain-covered window. Across the street, dark blue Honda Accord, engine idling. Natalie sat inside. Even from 3 floors up, Victor recognized the outline of her posture instantly. Waiting, watching, expecting. Holloway followed his gaze toward the window. "Is that her vehicle?" "Yes." Daniel looked too. Natalie quickly turned her face away. "Interesting. Very interesting." Victor picked up his wallet keys and folded them carefully into his pocket. Then he looked at Daniel. "Make sure chain of custody stays clean." Holloway frowned slightly at the statement. Daniel didn't. Because Daniel suddenly understood something uncomfortable. Victor Patterson was not reacting like a man surprised by false accusations. He was reacting like a man already studying the structure behind them. And somehow, that felt far more serious. As the 3 of them walked down the apartment hallway toward the elevators, Victor heard Mrs. Alvarez's door open slightly behind them. A frightened old woman watching through the crack. Another witness. Another rumor beginning. Down in the parking lot, Natalie remained inside the Honda. Victor walked past without looking directly at her. But through the rain-streaked windshield, he saw it clearly. The small smile beginning to form at the corner of her mouth. The interview room at Portland Central Precinct smelled faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. Gray table, gray walls, one camera mounted high in the corner. Victor Patterson sat with both hands resting calmly in front of him while rainwater dried slowly on the shoulders of his jacket. 7:03 a.m. He had already counted 3 separate camera positions on the way inside the building. One near intake, one above the west hallway, one outside interview room C. The placement told him something useful. This was still preliminary, not arrest level yet. Officer Megan Holloway entered first, carrying a slim case file. Daniel Ruiz followed several seconds later, holding 2 paper coffee cups from the vending machine downstairs. Daniel placed one in front of Victor. Victor nodded once, but did not drink it. Holloway sat across from him and opened the file immediately. "No attorney?" she asked. Victor looked at her evenly. "Not yet. You understand that would probably be smart." "Yes." "Then why wait?" Victor glanced briefly toward the observation mirror on the wall. "Because I'd rather hear the full allegation first." Again, that answer unsettled her slightly. Most people interrupted constantly during accusations. Victor listened instead. Holloway opened the file. "Miss Brooks alleges escalating intimidation over the last 4 months, she began. She claims you monitored her movements, threatened her verbally, and implied physical harm on multiple occasions. Victor remained silent. She also states you followed her to work twice in March. No. Holloway flipped pages. She provided screenshots of text messages sent from your phone number. Victor finally spoke. Show me timestamps. Holloway slid printed screenshots across the table. Victor studied them carefully, not emotionally, technically. Daniel watched him the entire time. Victor's eyes moved left to right, slowly pausing on details most people would miss. Signal strength icon, battery percentage, message spacing, then timestamps. Victor leaned back slightly. These were edited. Holloway folded her arms. You can tell that from one glance. Yes. How Victor pointed calmly. The spacing between message bubbles changes twice. Font rendering shifts near the timestamps. Compression artifacts don't match the rest of the image. Holloway frowned slightly and looked at Daniel. Daniel said nothing, because Victor was right. Even from across the table, Daniel could now see the inconsistencies. Victor pushed the papers back gently. She's rushing, he said quietly. What does that mean? Holloway asked. Victor met her eyes. It means whoever built this expected emotion to carry the evidence farther than the details. Silence settled briefly. Daniel finally sat down beside Holloway. Victor, he said carefully, did you ever threaten Natalie Brooks? In any way, no. Did you place that knife in the hallway closet? No. Did you know she was going to file this report? Victor paused. Not officially. Daniel narrowed his eyes slightly. What does that mean? Victor looked down briefly at the untouched coffee cup. People preparing false accusations behave differently. They test reactions before escalation. Holloway crossed her arms tighter. You're speaking like an investigator. Victor looked at her calmly. I was one. That was the first direct acknowledgement of his military background since entering the station. Daniel glanced toward the mirror instinctively. Somebody behind it was definitely listening now. Victor continued. Small narrative changes, controlled emotional displays, third-party rumor seeding, staged fear responses, rehearsed body language. He looked back up. Natalie started building this weeks ago. Holloway tapped her pen once against the file. You're very certain. I pay attention. Daniel leaned back slightly. That part had not changed at all. Years ago in Afghanistan, Victor Patterson had once identified a compromised local interpreter because the man stopped making eye contact during weather briefings. Not during interrogations. Weather briefings. That level of observation had saved lives. Now Daniel sat watching the same calm man analyze a domestic accusation with almost surgical precision. And somehow, that made the room colder. Holloway opened another folder. There's more. She slid several photographs across the table. Bruises on Natalie's forearm. Red marks near her wrist. Victor studied them quietly. Then he pointed at one image, taken in her office bathroom. Holloway blinked. How do you know that tile pattern? Evergreen Housing renovated those bathrooms last fall. Daniel looked at Victor carefully. No hesitation again. No bluffing. Just details. Victor slid the photos back. The bruising is superficial. You a doctor too? Holloway asked sharply. Victor ignored the tone. Pressure discoloration, not impact trauma. Holloway exhaled slowly through her nose. Do you understand how bad this looks for you? Yes. And you're still this calm. Victor finally picked up the coffee cup and took one sip before answering. Emotion doesn't improve evidence. Daniel looked down for a second after hearing that. Same cadence. Same discipline. Back overseas, younger soldiers used to mistake Victor's calmness for detachment until operations went bad. Then they realized calmness was the reason people survived around him. Holloway turned another page. There's also witness testimony. Victor's eyes lifted slightly. From Ryan Mercer. That landed harder than anything else so far. Not visibly. But Daniel noticed the subtle shift immediately. Victor had expected Natalie. Expected evidence. Expected manipulation. Ryan's direct involvement confirmed something deeper. Holloway noticed it too. You know him. Yes. How he works with Natalie, you ever threaten him? No. Ever confront him? No. Daniel leaned forward now. Victor, if there's something happening between them, now would be a good time to say it. Victor looked at him calmly. There's no value in guessing without proof. Holloway gave a short, disbelieving laugh. That's your response, yes. She stared at him for several seconds. You know, most people would be furious right now. Victor answered quietly. Most people aren't being framed by someone patient. The room went silent again. Daniel felt it this time. Not suspicion. Pattern recognition. Victor already believed this entire thing had structure behind it, and Daniel was beginning to believe him. A knock came at the interview room door. Another officer stepped halfway inside. Ruiz. Daniel stood and stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind him. Victor remained seated without moving. Holloway studied him for a long moment. You really don't scare easy, do you? Victor looked toward the camera in the corner. I learned a long time ago that panic makes people useful to liars. Outside in the hallway, Daniel listened while Sergeant Collins spoke quietly. We ran the timestamps. Daniel's eyes narrowed. And they don't line up. How bad? 2 messages were supposedly sent while Patterson badged into Columbia River Freight. Daniel looked toward the interview room door. You verified twice. Daniel rubbed a hand across his jaw slowly. That changed things. A lot. What about the knife? Still processing. Daniel nodded once. Then another thought hit him. Who collected the digital evidence from Brooks Patrol intake? Daniel's expression darkened slightly. Chain of custody on digital screenshots was notoriously fragile, especially manipulated ones. Inside the room, Holloway finally closed the file. Can I ask you something unofficially? Victor nodded slightly. Why stay with someone if you thought she was doing this? Victor took another sip of coffee. Because unlike the others, Holloway's question contained genuine confusion instead of accusation. Victor answered after a long pause. Because certainty matters. Holloway frowned slightly. You needed proof. Yes. And now Victor looked toward the rain-streaked window beside the observation mirror. Now I know. The door opened again. Daniel stepped back inside, carrying a thinner folder now, instead of the original case file. His expression had changed. Subtly. But enough. Victor noticed immediately. Daniel sat down slowly. Then he looked directly at Victor Patterson for the first time since the apartment search. Not like a suspect. Like a man recalculating a battlefield. There's a problem with the timestamps, Daniel said quietly. Victor nodded once. I figured there would be. Holloway looked sharply between them. Daniel opened the folder. And for the first time that morning, the direction of the investigation began to shift. By 9:40 that morning, rain clouds had settled low over downtown Portland like concrete pressed against the sky. Victor Patterson sat alone in interview room C while the precinct slowly changed around him. Morning shift officers rotated in. Phones rang harder. Coffee smell thickened. Outside the narrow wired glass window in the hallway, detectives moved faster now than they had 2 hours earlier. The case was no longer simple. That was obvious. Victor remained still in his chair, hands folded loosely, eyes occasionally lifting toward the camera in the upper corner. Waiting never bothered him. Military life had burned that weakness out of him years ago. Especially Afghanistan. Especially Kandahar. Especially the investigations. At 9:52, the interview room door opened again. A woman entered carrying a dark leather portfolio and a rain-speckled navy coat folded over one arm. Mid-40s. Sharp posture, controlled expression. Rebecca Sloan. Victor stood immediately. Not out of fear, respect. Rebecca had spent 11 years as a prosecutor before moving into criminal defense work across Multnomah County. She had a reputation for dismantling sloppy police work without theatrics. She shook Victor's hand once, firm, direct. Then she sat down across from him. "I've reviewed the preliminary complaint," she said calmly. Victor nodded. And Rebecca opened the portfolio. "The accusation is aggressive. The evidence is less impressive." Victor leaned back slightly. "The timestamps." "Yes." Rebecca slid printed copies onto the table. 2 screenshots place you sending threats at 11:14 p.m. and 11:26 p.m. Tuesday night. Victor already knew where this was going. At 11:09, Rebecca continued, "You badged into Columbia River Freight Systems." She tapped another document. At 11:31, you appear on Warehouse C surveillance. Victor remained silent. Rebecca studied him for a second. "You're not surprised?" "No." "You suspected fabrication early?" "Yes." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I can see why." There was no admiration in her tone, only professional recognition. The kind investigators gave each other when they spotted disciplined thinking. Rebecca continued flipping pages. "The knife concerns me less than the digital evidence." "Why, because planted physical evidence is risky." She tapped the screenshots again. "Manipulated digital evidence usually means the person got confident." Victor looked at the papers carefully. "She rushed." Rebecca looked up sharply. "That's exactly what I thought." The interview room door opened again. Daniel Ruiz stepped inside carrying another file box. His expression looked more strained now. Not emotionally, operationally, like a man realizing he had walked into something larger than the initial briefing suggested. Rebecca stood and introduced herself quickly. Daniel nodded. "I know your work." "That usually means either gratitude or resentment," Rebecca replied. Daniel almost smiled. "Today, probably gratitude." Victor noticed that immediately. Another shift. Another angle changing. Daniel placed the box on the table. "We recovered preliminary metadata from the screenshots," he said. "Creation timestamps don't match export timestamps." Rebecca folded her arms. "Edited? Likely." Victor remained quiet. Daniel looked toward him briefly before continuing. "There's more." He opened the box and removed a sealed evidence envelope. "Fingerprints from the knife are still processing," he said, "but the towel used to wrap it came back clean." Rebecca frowned slightly. "Too clean." Daniel nodded once. No kitchen residue, no detergent transfer, almost untouched. Victor finally spoke. Bought recently. Daniel looked at him. That's our guess, too. Rebecca studied Victor carefully now. Most clients panicked once evidence appeared. Victor analyzed structure instead. That made her curious. Daniel pulled another document free. We also checked building access at your apartment. Victor's eyes lifted slightly. Maintenance logs. Electronic entry records. Now Rebecca leaned forward, and Daniel hesitated briefly. Your apartment door opened at 1:13 a.m. Wednesday morning. Victor said nothing. You were already clocked in at Columbia River Freight by then. Rebecca's expression sharpened instantly. Who had access? Daniel answered carefully. We're still verifying. Victor already knew. Natalie. Possibly Ryan too. But assumptions were dangerous without chain-backed proof. Rebecca noticed Victor's silence. You already expected that too. Yes. Why? Victor looked down briefly at the table. Because people staging evidence usually test access before deployment. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. Same language. Deployment. Structure. Victor spoke about the accusation like a counterintelligence operation. And the uncomfortable part was that the logic fit perfectly. Rebecca closed the folder slowly. Victor, she said, I need complete honesty now. Is there anything in your apartment that could be interpreted badly? Number firearms locked storage outside the residence. Registered. Old military material. Yes? Daniel looked up. What kind, Victor? Paused briefly. Investigative archives. Personal logs. Service documents. Rebecca narrowed her eyes slightly. You kept operational records, not classified material, but detailed. Yes. Daniel exchanged a glance with Rebecca. That could become important later. Very important. Rebecca leaned back. I want to see everything. Victor nodded once. There's a gray case in the storage room closet. Daniel's eyes shifted immediately. The storage room. The same room where the knife had been found. Victor continued calmly. Combination lock. Top shelf. What's inside? Rebecca asked. 30 years of habits. That answer sat quietly in the room for a second. Then Daniel spoke carefully. You documented everything. Yes. How much is everything? Victor looked directly at him now. Enough. Daniel almost laughed despite the tension. Same answer pattern. Minimal words. Maximum meaning. Years ago in Afghanistan, younger soldiers used to complain Victor spoke like sealed documents. Nothing unnecessary ever escaped. Rebecca stood. I'm filing immediate requests for surveillance preservation. Daniel nodded quickly. We're already moving on that. Good, Rebecca replied. Because if this is staged, they escalated too early. Victor watched both of them carefully now. Neither fully realized the larger danger yet. False accusations were one thing. Structured false evidence was another. But coordinated narrative construction across multiple witnesses, that required planning. And planning usually left trails. Rebecca gathered her papers. I also want access to Natalie Brooks' original device submissions. Daniel hesitated. That may take time. Rebecca's expression hardened. Then move faster. The room fell quiet again after she left. Daniel remained standing near the door. Victor finally looked at him fully. You shouldn't have come personally this morning. Daniel frowned slightly. What Victor's voice stayed calm. You recognized me immediately. That creates vulnerability for you inside the department. Daniel stared at him. Even now, Victor was analyzing operational consequences. Not self-pity, not anger. Systems. Always systems. Daniel leaned against the wall quietly. You know what bothered me most this morning? Victor waited. The knife. Victor said nothing. It was too perfect, Daniel admitted. Exact location, exact description, exact timing. Victor nodded once. Real investigations are messy. Daniel looked at him carefully. You think she planned all this alone? Victor answered, after several seconds. No. Daniel felt something cold move slowly through his stomach, because he believed that answer immediately. The interview room door opened again. A young officer stepped inside hurriedly. Ruiz Daniel straightened. What? We got traffic camera pulls from East Burnside. And the officer looked briefly toward Victor before answering. There's footage of a blue Honda Accord outside Patterson's building around 100 a.m. Daniel's expression darkened instantly. Driver identified, not yet. Victor already knew. Ryan Mercer. But still, he said nothing, because silence forced investigations to walk their own path. And investigations built independently survived in court. Daniel grabbed the folder quickly. We're pulling the full traffic route now. The younger officer nodded and disappeared again. Daniel looked back toward Victor. For the first time all morning, the officer no longer looked like someone handling a domestic complaint. Now he looked like a former soldier standing near the edge of an intelligence operation. And Victor Patterson recognized that expression immediately, because years ago, he had worn it himself. As Daniel turned to leave, Victor finally spoke again. One more thing. Daniel stopped. Victor's eyes remained calm. Make sure they preserve the apartment hallway cameras before management overwrites them. Daniel stared at him for a second. Then realization hit. Timeline. Entry axis. Physical placement. Movement. Victor wasn't defending himself anymore. He was already reconstructing the crime scene. At 1:15 that afternoon, Portland rain finally stopped. The city looked washed but colorless, beneath a blanket of gray cloud stretching over the riverfront. Water still dripped from traffic lights along Burnside, while pedestrians moved quickly under damp coats and umbrellas. Inside Rebecca Sloan's office near Southwest Morrison Street, 4 computer monitors glowed across a long oak conference table. Victor Patterson sat quietly at one end while Rebecca built timelines. Not theories. Timelines. That difference mattered. Rebecca worked fast without appearing rushed. Legal pads spread around her like organized debris. Surveillance requests, access logs, phone records, traffic camera retrieval notices. Victor watched silently while she pinned times together minute by minute. Tuesday, Rebecca said, circling one entry. Natalie claims you sent threatening messages at 11:14 p.m. Victor nodded once. Rebecca pointed at another screen. Your company badge logged entry at 11:09. Another click. Warehouse camera footage appeared. Timestamp 11:31 p.m. Victor, walking across Dock C carrying a flashlight and clipboard. Rebecca leaned back slightly. Whoever fabricated the screenshots underestimated how much tracking exists in modern infrastructure. Victor's expression barely changed. That's common. Rebecca looked at him carefully. You've dealt with fabricated evidence before. It was not a question. Victor looked toward the rain-streaked office window. In military investigations, people lie when pressure outweighs loyalty. Rebecca folded her arms. Civilians, Victor answered quietly. When desire outweighs patience. That answer stayed in the room for a second. Rebecca returned to work. Okay, let's keep going. She opened another folder. Building access logs from Victor's apartment complex. Electronic key entry records. Maintenance elevator timestamps. Rebecca highlighted one line. Apartment 3, C113 AM. Victor already knew it was there. The building manager confirmed only 3 active keys existed, Rebecca said. Yours. Natalie's. Maintenance master. Victor remained silent. Rebecca studied him again. You think she used the spare key? Yes. You sound very certain. Victor looked at the screen calmly. Because forced entry would create unpredictability. Rebecca almost smiled. You really do think like an investigator. Victor said nothing. He had spent years learning that certainty only mattered when supported by systems. Emotion made witnesses unreliable. Systems did not care about emotions. Rebecca opened another video file. Parking garage surveillance from a fuel station near Southeast Grand Avenue. A dark blue Honda Accord appeared on screen. Timestamp 12:41 a.m. Ryan Mercer stepped out wearing a black rain jacket. Victor watched carefully. Ryan looked nervous even on silent video. Fast movements. Checking surroundings repeatedly. Rebecca paused the frame. Interesting thing here, she said. Victor waited. He bought latex gloves. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly for the first time all day. Not emotionally, operationally. Rebecca zoomed farther. Receipt timestamp, 12:43 a.m. 3 hours before police found the knife, she said quietly. Victor leaned back in his chair slowly, another layer collapsing. Rebecca stood and walked toward the office coffee machine. You know what bothers me? She asked while pouring coffee. Victor remained quiet. This doesn't feel impulsive. It wasn't. Rebecca looked over her shoulder. You really think she planned all of this? Victor answered after several seconds. Natalie builds narratives socially before acting structurally. Rebecca stared at him. That's oddly specific. She wanted witnesses emotionally prepared before evidence appeared. Rebecca walked back, holding 2 mugs. Meaning, Victor accepted the coffee but didn't drink it. People accept accusations faster when they've already absorbed smaller versions emotionally. Rebecca sat slowly. You noticed her doing that? Yes. With co-workers? Yes. Neighbors too? Yes. Rebecca shook her head once under her breath. That's disciplined. Victor finally looked directly at her. So is framing someone successfully. The office went quiet again. Outside traffic hissed across wet streets below. Rebecca turned back toward the monitors. Daniel Ruiz sent something else. She opened a compressed evidence folder. Apartment, hallway surveillance. Low-resolution footage from Victor's building. Timestamp, 1:11 a.m. A hooded figure entered the third-floor hallway carrying something rectangular beneath one arm. Rebecca enlarged the image carefully. Victor watched without moving. The figure paused near apartment 3C, used a key, entered. Timestamp 1:13 a.m. Rebecca froze the frame. Height matches. Natalie, she said quietly. Victor noticed more. The left shoulder tilt, same walking cadence, same slight outward angle of the right foot. Natalie, no question. Rebecca played the footage forward. 7 minutes later, the figure exited carrying nothing. Victor's eyes shifted toward the hallway timestamp again. 7 minutes. Enough time to place the knife. Enough time to manipulate the apartment. Enough time to reinforce the narrative. Rebecca muted the video completely. She thought nobody would check secondary systems, she said. Victor answered calmly. Most people don't. A notification sounded from Rebecca's laptop. New incoming file. Traffic camera retrieval. Daniel Ruiz. Rebecca opened it immediately. East Burnside intersection footage. Timestamp 1:28 a.m. The same Honda Accord rolled through the intersection 3 blocks from Victor's apartment. Driver visible for 2 seconds beneath passing streetlights. Ryan Mercer, clear enough to identify. Rebecca exhaled slowly. Well, Victor remained expressionless. Rebecca looked at him carefully now. You're still not angry. Victor stared at the monitor. Anger changes nothing. Most men would want revenge. Victor answered quietly. Most men didn't spend years documenting false battlefield reports. Rebecca leaned back slightly after hearing that. For the first time since meeting him, she understood something important. Victor Patterson's calmness was not emotional numbness. It was training. Years of separating facts from noise until emotional reaction became secondary to verification. That made him extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. Her office phone rang suddenly. Rebecca answered, Yes. Pause. Her expression sharpened immediately, when another pause. I'll handle it. She hung up and looked toward Victor. That was Daniel. Victor waited. Natalie filed a second supplemental complaint. Victor's face remained still. What kind? She claims you followed her this morning near St. Vincent Medical Center. Victor blinked once slowly. Nothing more. Rebecca narrowed her eyes. You have an alibi? Yes. We're warehouse perimeter inspection. 12 witnesses. Rebecca nodded immediately. Good. Victor took his first sip of coffee. Still warm, still bitter. Rebecca opened another notepad. She's escalating because the first evidence isn't holding. Victor nodded once. She's trying to force emotional pressure onto the investigation. Rebecca looked at him carefully. You really saw this coming, didn't you? Victor answered honestly. I saw preparation, not timing. Rebecca tapped her pen thoughtfully. She underestimated documentation. No, Victor corrected quietly. She underestimated procedure. That answer stayed with Rebecca. Because he was right. The case was shifting not because of dramatic revelations, not because of emotional speeches, because systems were beginning to contradict the lie. Badge scans, traffic cameras, metadata, access logs. The structure itself was turning against the accusation. Rebecca's phone buzzed again. Text from Daniel. She read it silently before looking up. What now? Victor asked. Rebecca slid the phone across the table. Photo attached. Ryan Mercer's vehicle parked outside Victor's apartment building at 12:58 a.m. Clear license plate. Clear timestamp. Clear rain conditions matching hallway footage. Rebecca folded her arms slowly. Your instincts were correct. Victor stared at the image for several seconds. Then he spoke quietly. No. Rebecca frowned slightly. What Victor looked toward the darkening office windows. My instincts only suggested structure. His eyes returned to the photograph. This is proof. Natalie Brooks filed the second complaint at 6:42 p.m. By 7:15, the paperwork had already reached Daniel Ruiz's desk at Portland Central Precinct. Daniel read the statement twice without speaking, then a third time. Outside his office window, evening rain drifted across downtown Portland, while patrol lights reflected red and blue across wet streets below. The complaint claimed Victor Patterson had followed Natalie near St. Vincent Medical Center earlier that morning. According to her statement, Victor parked across the street from the hospital, watched her for nearly 20 minutes, then drove away after she noticed him. Attached were two grainy cell phone photographs. Dark pickup truck, male silhouette, low resolution. Just believable enough. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. Too fast. Everything was happening too fast now. False evidence worked best when pressure never stopped building. Daniel knew that. If Natalie kept adding accusations faster than investigators could dismantle them, eventually somebody higher up would push for formal charges simply to avoid political risk. That was likely the strategy. Keep escalation ahead of verification. Daniel grabbed the case file and headed downstairs. Interview room B. Ryan Mercer sat waiting inside. Nervous, leg bouncing constantly beneath the metal table. Hands clasped too tightly. Daniel noticed sweat stains under Ryan's collar despite the cold weather outside. Not the posture of a calm witness. Daniel entered without speaking immediately. He closed the door, sat down, opened the file slowly. Silence stretched. Ryan finally broke first. So, am I in trouble or something? Daniel looked up calmly. That depends. Ryan swallowed. I already told officers everything. You told them Victor Patterson threatened Natalie, yes. You also stated you saw him outside Evergreen Housing 2 weeks ago. Ryan nodded quickly. Daniel flipped a page. And now Natalie claims Victor followed her near St. Vincent Medical Center this morning. Ryan hesitated slightly. Right. Daniel watched him carefully. There it was. Delay. Tiny, but real. You were with her? Daniel asked. Yeah. What time? Ryan looked toward the ceiling briefly, trying to reconstruct instead of recall. Bad sign. Maybe around Daniel wrote nothing down. What was Natalie wearing? Ryan blinked. What? At the hospital. Oh, black coat. Daniel held his eyes for several seconds. Then he opened another folder. Interesting. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Daniel slid a printed document across the table. Employee shift verification. Columbia River Freight Systems. Victor Patterson logged continuous activity from 9:18 a.m. through 11:47 a.m. Multiple camera confirmations. Multiple witnesses. Ryan stared at the paper. Daniel watched the panic begin behind his eyes. Not dramatic, just enough. You understand the problem here? Daniel asked quietly. Ryan swallowed hard. Maybe the timing's off. The timing, Daniel replied calmly, is very off. Silence settled heavily into the room. Ryan rubbed his palms against his jeans. Daniel noticed something else too. Ryan never once asked to see the evidence himself, because people lying about coordinated stories already knew what the fabricated evidence looked like. Daniel leaned back slowly. Ryan. Yeah. You ever serve in the military? Ryan frowned slightly. No. Daniel nodded once. Then let me explain something. He folded his hands together. Real pressure doesn't usually make disciplined people panic. His eyes stayed fixed on Ryan. It makes careless people rush. Ryan said nothing. Daniel continued. And rushing creates mistakes. Across town, Victor Patterson sat inside Rebecca Sloane's office, watching traffic move below the rain-streaked windows. The city had turned dark early beneath heavy clouds. Rebecca stood beside a whiteboard covered in timelines, photographs, and printed metadata reports. "Here's what bothers me most," she said. Victor looked up. "She keeps escalating after every contradiction." Victor nodded slightly. "She thinks pressure can outrun procedure." Rebecca circled a timestamp. "That only works temporarily." Victor remained silent. Rebecca looked toward him. "You know what this reminds me of?" Victor waited. A prosecutor trying to force a weak case through public emotion before evidence collapses. Victor stared quietly at the board. "Natalie understands social pressure very well." Rebecca crossed her arms. "You sound almost impressed." Victor answered honestly. "She's disciplined." That was true. Natalie had not built random accusations. She built emotional infrastructure first. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, social assumptions, fear cues, then evidence, then escalation. Most false accusers failed because they moved emotionally. Natalie moved structurally. That made her dangerous. Rebecca's phone buzzed again. "Daniel." She answered immediately. "What happened?" Pause. Her expression sharpened. "How bad?" Another pause. "I'll tell him." She hung up slowly. "Ryan's cracking," she said. Victor showed no visible reaction. Daniel pushed timeline inconsistencies. Ryan started changing details. Victor nodded once. Expected. Rebecca walked back toward the table. "There's something else." She slid another photograph across to him. Traffic camera image. Ryan's Honda Accord. Timestamp 12:58 a.m. Same night the knife appeared. Victor studied it quietly. Then his eyes moved to the passenger seat. Rebecca noticed. What Victor pointed calmly. Laptop bag. Rebecca leaned closer. Dark leather satchel partially visible beside Ryan. She frowned slightly. So Victor's voice remained even. "Ryan works in IT." Rebecca's eyes narrowed immediately. Digital manipulation, metadata editing, screenshot fabrication. Now the structure aligned more clearly. Rebecca grabbed another legal pad. If Ryan handled the fabricated screenshots, he becomes operationally necessary. Victor finished. Rebecca stared at him for a second. Operationally necessary. Again, the military language slipped through naturally. Not dramatic. Habitual. Victor continued quietly. Natalie needed someone technically capable, but emotionally dependent. Rebecca sat slowly. "You really think she manipulated him too?" Victor answered after a pause. "Yes." "Why?" "Because Ryan panics under pressure." Rebecca considered that. True. Everything Daniel described suggested exactly that. Victor looked toward the rain outside. Natalie wouldn't trust someone stable with something this risky. At 9:08 p.m., Daniel Ruiz arrived personally at Rebecca's office. He entered carrying another evidence folder and looked more exhausted than before. Not physically, mentally, the kind of exhaustion that came from realizing an investigation had crossed invisible lines. Rebecca closed the office door behind him. "Well," Daniel tossed the folder gently onto the conference table. "We pulled Ryan's cell location data." Victor already understood the answer before hearing it. Daniel opened the file. His phone pinged 3 blocks from Victor's apartment at 12:52 a.m. Rebecca exhaled quietly. Daniel continued. Then again, at 1:31 near East Burnside. Victor looked toward the timestamps carefully. Entry, exit, movement pattern, structured. Rebecca rubbed her forehead. This is getting ugly. Daniel nodded. There's more. He slid another photograph free. Convenience store security footage. Ryan buying latex gloves and duct tape. Time-stamped. Clear face. Clear receipt. Daniel looked directly at Victor now. You were right. Victor remained still. Daniel continued quietly. She's building incidents faster every time we contradict her. Victor finally spoke. That means she's losing control of the timeline. Daniel stared at him. Most suspects reacted emotionally when evidence cleared them. Victor reacted analytically, always analytically. Rebecca leaned against the desk. So what happens next? Daniel answered immediately. We go deeper. Victor looked toward him carefully. How deep? Daniel hesitated, then finally said it. We subpoena Natalie's original devices. The room fell quiet, because everybody understood what that meant. If the digital forensics confirmed manipulation, this stopped being a domestic accusation case. It became conspiracy, evidence tampering, false reporting, potential fraud. Daniel looked at Victor carefully. You know something strange, Victor waited. The entire time I've known you, Daniel shook his head slightly, I've never seen you look surprised. Victor stared toward the city lights beyond the rain, then answered quietly. People rarely surprise me. A long silence followed. Then Daniel opened the final folder. Inside sat printed screenshots from Natalie's newest complaint. Rebecca examined them first, then slowly looked up. She made another mistake. Daniel nodded once. Victor waited. Rebecca turned the page toward him. The metadata embedded in Natalie's newest photo had not been stripped correctly. GPS coordinates remained attached. Not St. Vincent Medical Center. Not even close. The photograph had been taken 3 miles away near Evergreen Housing's parking garage. And for the first time since this began, Victor Patterson saw the investigation finally beginning to turn fully against her. Friday morning arrived cold and windless over Portland. The rain had finally stopped during the night, leaving the streets slick beneath pale gray light. Downtown traffic crawled slowly past coffee shops and food trucks, while the Willamette River moved dark and heavy beneath the bridges. At 7:10 a.m., Victor Patterson unlocked the storage unit 3 miles east of his apartment near an industrial lot off Northeast Halsey Street. Rebecca Sloan stood beside him holding a paper coffee cup in one hand and legal folders under the other arm. You rent this place personally? She asked. Yes. How long? 12 years. Rebecca looked around the narrow storage corridor lined with steel roll-up doors and fluorescent lights. Very military. Victor ignored the comment. Unit 214 opened with a metallic rattle. Inside sat shelves organized with exact spacing, labeled archive boxes, tool cases, plastic-sealed document bins. Nothing stacked carelessly. Nothing random. Rebecca stepped inside slowly. This is either impressive, she said quietly, or slightly terrifying. Victor walked toward the back wall. Then he crouched beside a gray hard-shell case, roughly the size of a carry-on suitcase. Combination lock, minimal scratches, military-grade hinges. Rebecca watched carefully. This, the famous gray case. Victor nodded once. The lock clicked open. Inside sat rows of external hard drives, notebooks, labeled folders, and neatly organized flash storage containers. Rebecca stared down at the contents silently. This is 30 years of documentation. Most of it? You kept all this. Victor opened a smaller folder. Patterns matter. Rebecca picked up one notebook carefully. Every page contained compact handwriting, dates, locations, observations, maintenance logs, schedules, conversations, not obsessive, structured. Like an investigator building timelines nobody else could see yet. Rebecca flipped through several pages. You documented your relationship too? Yes. She looked up sharply. How detailed, Victor answered calmly. Enough. Again that word. Enough. Never more than necessary. Rebecca noticed something then. The notebooks did not contain emotional entries. No venting, no dramatic language, only observations. April 14th. Natalie returned home 1:12 a.m., smelled of unfamiliar cologne. May 3rd. Spare key repositioned in kitchen drawer. June 11th, Ryan Mercer vehicle observed near apartment at 11:48 p.m. Rebecca slowly closed the notebook. You were building a timeline before the accusation started. Victor looked at the open gray case. I was identifying behavioral change. Rebecca studied him carefully. You suspected infidelity, yes. But not this. Victor paused. No. Silence settled briefly inside the storage unit. Outside, somewhere beyond the corridor, a delivery truck backed up with a long mechanical beep. Rebecca opened another folder from the gray case. Dashcam archives. Dated. Categorized. Backed up twice. She looked up slowly. You really documented everything, Victor answered quietly. I learned a long time ago that memory becomes unreliable under pressure. That sentence lingered heavily in the cold storage unit air. Rebecca suddenly understood why Victor seemed emotionally untouchable throughout the investigation. He trusted systems more than feelings. Systems could survive attacks. Emotions could not. Victor removed a small black hard drive from the case. This matters most. Rebecca took it carefully. What's on it? Apartment security backups. Rebecca frowned. You installed private cameras, motion sensors only, legal coverage areas. Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. You never mentioned this. I wanted independent retrieval first. Smart. Very smart. If police collected footage before Victor secured original copies, chain of custody complications could appear later. Rebecca connected the drive to her laptop. Files populated instantly across the screen. Time-stamped hallway motion logs. Entry chimes. Door activity. Rebecca clicked one at random. June 14th, 1:11 a.m. The hallway outside Victor's apartment appeared grainy but usable. Rebecca watched the footage carefully, then froze. Natalie. Clear enough now. No hood this time. Dark coat. Hair tied back. Using a key. Entering the apartment. Rebecca leaned closer. She didn't know about this camera. Victor said nothing. The footage continued. 7 minutes later, Natalie exited carrying nothing. Then another figure appeared briefly at the far hallway intersection. Ryan Mercer. Rebecca stared at the screen. Well, Victor remained still beside her. Rebecca rewound slowly. Ryan never approached the apartment directly. He acted as lookout, watching both stairwells, monitoring movement. Rebecca looked up sharply. This was coordinated. Yes. Jesus Christ. Victor's expression never changed. Rebecca exhaled slowly. No wonder you wanted independent retrieval. Victor nodded once. If they realized this footage existed, they might attempt deletion. Rebecca immediately copied the files onto encrypted legal storage. Then another thought hit her. Did Natalie know about this storage unit? Number 'em. What about the gray case? Rebecca leaned back seat in the folding chair slowly. That may have saved your life. Victor looked toward the fluorescent ceiling lights. Maybe. At 9:32 a.m., Daniel Ruiz arrived. Rebecca had called him 20 minutes earlier using encrypted evidence transfer protocol instead of ordinary email. That alone told Daniel how serious things had become. He entered the storage unit quietly, then stopped after seeing the shelves. "What is all this?" Victor answered calmly. "Documentation." Daniel looked around slowly. "You live like this?" Rebecca handed him the laptop. "Watch." Daniel viewed the hallway footage once, then again, then a third time without speaking. Natalie entering, Ryan standing lookout, precise timestamps, clean sequence. His jaw tightened slowly. "That's conspiracy," he muttered. Rebecca nodded. "And evidence tampering." Daniel rubbed a hand across his face. "This case is turning radioactive." Victor remained silent. Daniel looked toward him. "You knew she was escalating." "Yes, but you still didn't stop her." Victor's eyes moved calmly toward him. "Interruption without proof creates argument." He nodded toward the screen. "Observation creates evidence." Daniel stared at him for several seconds. Years ago, overseas, Victor Patterson had dismantled fraudulent supply operations by waiting months instead of acting emotionally. Daniel remembered that now. Victor did not react quickly. He reacted permanently. Rebecca opened another folder from the gray case. Military service records, recommendations, operational commendations. Daniel glanced down casually at first, then froze. His expression changed instantly. "Wait." He picked up the top document. Captain Victor Patterson, Joint Intelligence Operations Group, Kandahar Province. Daniel looked up slowly. "You were with JIOG?" "Yes." Daniel stared at him. Most people had no idea what Joint Intelligence Operations Groups actually handled. Counterintelligence, internal investigations, corruption exposure, false reporting, human reliability analysis. Suddenly, everything about Victor made terrifying sense. The calmness, the documentation, the pattern recognition. Daniel sat down heavily in the folding chair. "You spent years investigating deception professionally." Victor answered quietly. "Yes." Rebecca looked between them. "You never told me that." Victor looked toward the open case. "It wasn't relevant." Daniel almost laughed under his breath. "It's extremely relevant." Victor remained expressionless. Daniel shook his head slowly. Natalie picked the wrong man to frame. Victor finally looked directly at him. "No." Daniel frowned slightly. What Victor's voice stayed calm. "She picked a man who documents." That answer landed harder than Daniel expected, because it was true. This investigation was not collapsing because Victor was powerful, or rich, or connected. It was collapsing because structure mattered more than narrative. Rebecca's phone buzzed suddenly, unknown number. She answered carefully. "Yes." Pause. Her expression sharpened instantly. "Who is this?" Another pause. Then silence. The call disconnected. Rebecca slowly lowered the phone. "What Daniel asked." She said one sentence. Victor looked toward her. Rebecca swallowed once. "Tell Victor to stop digging before somebody gets hurt." The storage unit fell completely silent. Daniel's expression darkened immediately. Rebecca looked toward Victor. For the first time since meeting him, she expected visible anger, or fear, or surprise. Victor gave none. He simply closed the gray case slowly, locked it, then stood. And when he finally spoke, his voice became quieter than before, which somehow made it more dangerous. That means they're scared now. The interview room felt colder this time. Not physically, structurally. Natalie Brooks sat alone beneath the fluorescent lights inside interview room 2 at Portland's Central Precinct, while a camera blinked red in the upper corner. 10:18 a.m. Saturday morning. Outside the building downtown, Portland moved slowly through damp gray weather and weak sunlight, pushing through low clouds. Traffic noise drifted faintly through reinforced windows, while officers changed shifts in the hallway beyond the door. Natalie crossed one leg carefully over the other and adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored coat. Controlled posture, controlled breathing, controlled face. Even now she looked composed. That mattered to her. Across the observation room, Daniel Ruiz stood beside Rebecca Sloan while Detective Laura Bennett reviewed printed evidence folders across a steel table. Victor Patterson remained farther back near the wall. Silent, hands folded loosely, watching. Detective Bennett was in her early 50s, with the tired eyes of someone who had spent decades sorting truth from performance. She did not impress easily, and she especially did not trust emotional symmetry in accusations anymore. "She's good," Bennett muttered quietly while watching Natalie through the glass. Rebecca nodded once. "Yes." Victor said nothing. Bennett opened the first folder. "All right," she said calmly. "We go slow first." Daniel looked toward Victor briefly. Victor's expression never changed. Slow was correct. People protecting lies usually damage themselves when allowed room to keep talking. Inside the interview room, Natalie looked up as Bennett entered carrying a slim case file. "Miss Brooks," Bennett said politely while sitting down. "Thank you for coming in again." Natalie gave a careful nod. "Of course. I just want this resolved." Bennett smiled faintly. "That's what we want too." Natalie folded her hands together neatly. Perfect victim posture. Rebecca noticed it immediately. Nothing excessive, no shaking, no visible hostility, just enough vulnerability to appear believable. Bennett opened the folder slowly. "I'd like to revisit your timeline near St. Vincent Medical Center yesterday morning." Natalie nodded. "Okay. You stated Victor Patterson followed you there around 10 a.m. Yes. And you recognized his truck immediately." Bennett slid a photograph across the table. "Is this the image you submitted?" Natalie looked down. "Yes." Bennett folded her hands. "Interesting thing about digital images." Natalie remained calm. "Okay. They carry metadata." Tiny pause. "Barely visible. But Victor saw it instantly through the observation glass. The first crack." Bennett continued. "The GPS coordinates embedded in this image place it near Evergreen Housing's parking structure." Natalie blinked once, then gave a soft, confused expression. "I don't understand." Bennett slid another document forward. "Additionally, Victor Patterson was documented on shift during the exact period you described." Natalie looked down slowly. "Not panic yet. Recalculation." "She must have the timing wrong," Rebecca murmured quietly behind the glass. Victor nodded once. "Expected." Bennett leaned back slightly. "Maybe, but timing matters." Natalie crossed her arms now. Subtle defensive shift. First emotional deviation all morning. I was under stress. Bennett nodded sympathetically. That makes sense. Then she opened another folder. Let's talk about the screenshots. Natalie's eyes shifted briefly. Again, tiny. Again, visible. You provided threatening messages allegedly sent by Victor Patterson. Yes. Our digital analysis indicates the images were modified. Long silence. Natalie's face stayed controlled. Too controlled. I don't know anything about that, she said carefully. Behind the glass, Daniel exhaled quietly. There it was. Distance language. Not denial. Separation. Victor remained motionless. Bennett continued gently. Ryan Mercer assisted you with phone backups before, correct? Another pause. Yes. How often? Sometimes at work. Bennett nodded casually. Did he help organize these screenshots? Natalie hesitated longer this time. I don't remember. Rebecca looked toward Victor. Most people would miss how significant that answer was. Victor did not. People telling truth usually rejected false technical involvement immediately. Natalie softened instead, leaving exit paths. Bennett slid another photograph across the table. Security footage. Ryan Mercer purchasing latex gloves and duct tape at 12:43 a.m. Natalie's jaw tightened very slightly. Barely visible, but enough. Bennett watched carefully. Why was Ryan near Victor Patterson's apartment? After midnight, Natalie looked up slowly. I don't know. His phone pinged there. I don't control where Ryan goes. Bennett nodded calmly. That's fair. Then she placed another image down. Apartment hallway footage. Natalie entering Victor's apartment using he. Timestamp visible. Clear enough now to identify her. The room finally changed. Not dramatically, but the structure shifted. Natalie stared at the image silently for several seconds. Her breathing slowed intentionally. Victor watched carefully. She was trying to regain rhythm. Bennett kept her voice neutral. You told officers you feared entering the apartment. Natalie finally looked up. I still had belongings there. After filing complaints, sis. Bennett nodded once. Why didn't you mention returning at 1:13 a.m.? Natalie's eyes flicked downward. Another recalculation. Then she answered quietly, I forgot. Behind the observation glass, Rebecca almost laughed under her breath. Too many contradictions now. Too many timeline fractures. Daniel watched Victor instead of Natalie. Victor showed no satisfaction, no anger, no triumph, only observation. That unsettled Daniel more than emotional reaction would have. Inside the room, Bennett opened the final evidence folder. Forensic processing recovered partial prints from the knife evidence packaging. Natalie sat very still. Okay. Bennett looked directly at her. Your fingerprints were present. Silence. Longer this time. Natalie finally leaned back in her chair slowly. And for the first time since entering the building, frustration flashed visibly across her face. Tiny, but real. Bennett noticed immediately. So the detective said calmly, help me understand how your fingerprints ended up on evidence allegedly hidden by Victor Patterson. Natalie looked toward the camera in the corner briefly, then toward the table again. When she spoke, her voice had changed slightly. Harder now. I touched a lot of things in that apartment. Bennett nodded. Wrapped inside an evidence towel. No answer. Bennett folded her hands. Miss Brooks, Right now, you're standing very close to filing false police reports and evidence manipulation. Natalie looked up sharply. There's no way you're accusing me after everything he did. Emotion finally surfaced. Not fear, anger, real anger. Victor watched silently through the glass. There. Finally. The performance had slipped. Bennett remained calm. Then explained the contradictions. Natalie's breathing sharpened slightly. You don't know him. Bennett said nothing. Natalie leaned forward now. He knows how to manipulate people. He spent years in military intelligence. Behind the glass, Daniel's eyes shifted immediately toward Victor. Natalie knew more about Victor's past than she previously admitted. Interesting. Very interesting. Bennett spoke carefully. How did you know details about his military assignments? Natalie froze. Only for a second. But it was enough. Victor saw the exact moment she realized the mistake. Bennett leaned forward slightly. You previously stated Victor never discussed operational details. Natalie opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said quietly, I heard things. Bennett leaned back slowly, and the room went cold, because now another possibility had emerged. Someone had accessed Victor's military records, or personal archives, or both. Outside the observation room, Rebecca looked toward Victor carefully. She searched your files. Victor nodded once. Yes. Daniel stared at him. You think she went through the gray case number? Victor's eyes narrowed slightly toward the interview room. But she tried. Inside, Bennett closed the final folder. Then she spoke the sentence that changed everything. We're preparing forensic warrants for all submitted devices. Natalie's expression finally cracked fully. Not panic. Not yet. But fear. Real fear. Because digital forensics did not care about narratives. And for the first time since this began, Natalie Brooks understood the structure beneath her story was collapsing. Then Bennett asked one final question, quietly, directly. Miss Brooks, who helped you plan this? And through the observation glass, Victor Patterson saw something he had been waiting for since the first knock on his apartment door. Natalie looked toward the exit instead of answering. By Monday morning, the story had started leaking beyond police reports. Not officially. Officially, the investigation remained active and ongoing, but Portland moved information through whispers long before press releases, especially accusations involving violence, especially when the accused was quiet. At 8:20 a.m., Victor Patterson walked into Columbia River Freight Systems under a sky the color of wet cement. Forklifts whined across loading lanes, while diesel engines rattled through the riverfront yard. Conversation stopped briefly when he entered the security office. Not dramatically, just enough. Tyler Jensen looked down at his coffee. Melissa avoided eye contact completely. Another guard pretended to focus on paperwork already finished. Victor noticed every reaction without appearing to. The silence around him had changed texture. Before people ignored him, now they watched him carefully. That difference mattered. His supervisor, Doug Henley, stepped out of the office holding a clipboard against his chest. Doug was 58, with heavy shoulders and the permanently exhausted expression of a man who had spent 30 years managing truck schedules and insurance problems. Victor, he said quietly. Victor nodded once. Doug glanced toward the others before lowering his voice. Need a word. Inside the office, Doug closed the door halfway. Not fully. Another detail. People fully closed doors when they trusted privacy. Half open meant caution. Doug rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Corporate called. Victor waited. Doug exhaled slowly. They want you on temporary leave until the investigation settles. Victor showed no reaction. Doug hurried forward verbally. Listen, I argued against it. You know I did. Victor nodded once. I know. This isn't personal. I know. Doug looked frustrated now. That's it. That's all you've got to say. Victor looked through the office window toward the freight yard. Procedure matters. Doug stared at him for a second, then quietly sat down. Because somehow that answer made the entire thing worse. Victor wasn't angry, didn't defend himself, didn't beg. A man fighting desperately could be explained emotionally. Victor Patterson simply accepted structure as structure. That unnerved people. Doug cleared his throat. You're still getting paid this week. Understood. And Victor looked toward him. Doug hesitated. I don't believe what they're saying. Victor studied his face carefully. Doug meant it, but fear still sat underneath the statement. Fear of liability, fear of being wrong publicly, fear of association. Victor recognized all three immediately. Thank you, he said quietly. Nothing more. Outside, Melissa watched him clean out his locker 15 minutes later. Not much inside. Extra flashlight batteries, thermos, black notebook, rain jacket. Tyler finally stepped closer while Victor zipped the faded gray lunch cooler shut. Man, if this is all fake. Victor looked up calmly. It is, Tyler swallowed. You should sue somebody. Victor closed the locker door. Not yet. Again, that answer carried weight Tyler didn't fully understand. Not yet implied timing, patience, procedure. Victor left the warehouse without looking back. A crosstown evergreen housing initiative was collapsing internally. Not publicly, not yet, but internally. Natalie Brooks arrived at work Monday morning to find two HR representatives waiting beside her office door. One carried a folder. The other avoided eye contact. Employees nearby pretended not to watch. Natalie's posture remained perfect while they escorted her toward conference room B. But rumors moved faster than professionalism. By noon, half the building knew. Digital evidence review, police follow-up, questions about Ryan Mercer. By 1 p.m., somebody anonymously forwarded screenshots of the investigation rumors into multiple staff group chats. Natalie's carefully built social structure had started cracking. And unlike evidence, social trust rarely repaired cleanly once damaged. At 2:15 p.m., Daniel Ruiz sat alone in his unmarked police sedan outside a diner near Interstate 5. Rainwater dripped slowly from overhead power lines while traffic rolled past in wet gray waves. Victor Patterson arrived exactly 3 minutes later, still driving the same battered Ford F-150, still carrying himself the same way. Daniel watched him step inside the diner calmly, as if none of this chaos existed. Inside the diner smelled like frying oil and burnt coffee. Old booths, cracked vinyl seats. A waitress named Carla called Victor Hahn automatically before realizing Daniel sat waiting. Victor slid into the booth across from him. No greeting, no questions. Carla poured coffee silently and left menus neither man touched. Daniel stared down into his cup for several seconds before speaking. I almost arrested you. Victor remained still. But you didn't. Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. Barely. Silence settled between them. Outside rain tapped softly against the windows. Daniel finally looked up. You know what keeps bothering me? Victor waited. You never once tried using rank or military history to pressure us. Victor stirred his coffee slowly. Wouldn't help. Yes, it would. No, Victor corrected quietly. It would contaminate procedure. Daniel leaned back slightly. Still the same. Always protecting systems instead of ego. You really trust procedure that much? Daniel asked. Victor answered after a pause. I trust structure more than emotion. Daniel looked out the window briefly. That's not how most people survive accusations like this. Victor's eyes stayed calm. Most people react before understanding the battlefield. The word battlefield hung strangely inside the diner. Not dramatic. Habitual. Daniel rubbed his jaw slowly. She's filing for a restraining order. Victor nodded once. I expected that. She's still pushing. Yes. Daniel lowered his voice. Victor... Why Victor looked toward the rain outside? Because if she stops now, the collapse becomes intentional. He glanced back toward Daniel. If she keeps escalating, she can still claim fear. Daniel stared at him. That logic was cold, precise, and probably correct. The waitress returned with pie nobody had ordered. Carla always did that for regulars. Victor thanked her politely. Daniel finally spoke again. I read more of your service records. Victor said nothing. Joint Intelligence Operations Group wasn't normal military police work. No. Daniel leaned forward slightly. You investigated false reporting operations. Yes. Fraud too. Yes. And internal deception. Victor nodded once. Daniel exhaled slowly. So when Natalie started building this, Victor finished quietly. I recognized the structure. Another silence followed. Then Daniel asked the question that had been bothering him for days. Why stay with her after that? Victor looked down at the untouched pie. Because accusations without proof become arguments. Daniel frowned slightly. And proof matters more. Victor looked directly at him. Proof survives. That answer stayed with Daniel long after the conversation moved on. At 5:40 p.m., Rebecca Sloan called Victor while he sat inside his apartment reviewing copied evidence files. Her voice sounded sharper than usual. We've got a hearing date. Victor waited. Wednesday morning, Multnomah County Courthouse. Restraining order, yes? Victor looked toward the apartment window where evening rain blurred the city lights beyond Burnside. Good. Rebecca paused. Good. Yes. Most clients don't say that. Victor closed one evidence folder carefully. She's committing fully now. Rebecca went quiet for a second. Then she understood. The farther Natalie pushed publicly, the harder retreat became later. Every new statement increased exposure. Every formal accusation created discoverable evidence. Every courtroom filing tightened procedural chains around her own story. Rebecca spoke carefully. You really think this ends with criminal charges against her? Victor answered softly. No. Rebecca frowned. What Victor looked toward the locked gray case sitting near the hallway closet, then toward the city beyond the rain. It ends with somebody making a mistake they can't explain. And somewhere across Portland, Natalie Brooks sat alone in her apartment, rewriting her story for the third time. Wednesday morning arrived clear for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Cold sunlight spread across downtown Portland while traffic crawled around the Multnomah County Courthouse on Southwest First Avenue. News vans were not present yet, but local reporters had already begun circling the story online. False accusation rumors. Veteran under investigation. Nonprofit executive seeking protection. The public still did not know which direction the case was turning. Inside courtroom 4, B people whispered before proceedings officially began. Attorneys organized files. Deputies checked seating rows. The smell of polished wood and stale air conditioning filled the room. Victor Patterson entered at 8:41 a.m. wearing an Old Navy suit and plain charcoal tie. Nothing expensive, nothing designed for sympathy. He carried one thick black binder under his arm and moved with the same measured calm he carried everywhere else. Several people in the gallery looked toward him immediately. Most expected someone larger, louder, dangerous looking. Instead, they saw a quiet, middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes. That contrast worked against him and for him at the same time. Natalie Brooks entered 6 minutes later. Cream-colored blazer, hair perfectly styled, subtle makeup. Controlled expression. She looked fragile in exactly the right way. Rebecca Sloan noticed it immediately. Still performing, she murmured quietly. Victor sat beside her without responding. At the opposite table sat Natalie's attorney, Leonard Vance. Early 60s. Smooth voice. Expensive watch. The kind of attorney who specialized in emotional framing before evidence arrived. Judge Eleanor Graves entered at exactly 9 a.m. Former prosecutor. Known for low tolerance toward courtroom theatrics. That mattered. Everybody stood. Then the hearing began. Leonard Vance moved first. He walked slowly before the judge with practiced restraint. Your Honor, he began, Miss Brooks seeks protection. After months of escalating intimidation and threatening behavior from Mr. Victor Patterson. Natalie lowered her eyes slightly at the perfect moment. Victor watched silently. Vance continued, My client has endured stalking, psychological intimidation, implied violence, and credible fear for her safety. He held up printed screenshots, photographs, statements, everything carefully arranged. To the uninformed eye, it looked convincing. That was the danger of layered false evidence. Individually weak, collectively emotional. Judge Graves reviewed the papers without expression. Mr. Patterson contests the allegations, she asked. Rebecca stood smoothly. Completely, Your Honor. On what basis? Rebecca opened her binder. Evidence integrity. That shifted the room slightly. Not emotion, structure. Rebecca stepped toward the evidence table calmly. The petitioner's digital submissions contain metadata, inconsistencies, edited timestamps, and geographic contradictions. She slid forward certified reports. Additionally, multiple independent systems place Mr. Patterson elsewhere during key allegations. Judge Graves adjusted her glasses. Explain. Rebecca began carefully. Not dramatic, precise. June 14th, 11:14 p.m. Threatening message allegedly sent by Mr. Patterson. She displayed security logs. Mr. Patterson badged into Columbia River Freight Systems at 11:09 p.m. Another document, warehouse surveillance confirms presence at 11:31. Another, Internal radio communication logs confirm active duty engagement. The courtroom quieted. Judge Graves examined the documents carefully. Leonard Vance shifted slightly for the first time. Rebecca continued. Second allegation. Hospital stalking incident near St. Vincent Medical Center. She placed enlarged metadata analysis onto the display monitor. The submitted photograph was geotagged near Evergreen Housing Initiative parking structure. Murmurs moved faintly through the gallery. Natalie remained still, but Victor saw her right hand tighten slightly against the table. Tiny, but real. Rebecca turned another page. Further traffic surveillance and building access records placed third-party witness Ryan Mercer near Mr. Patterson's apartment during the period physical evidence was allegedly discovered. Now Leonard Vance stood quickly. Your Honor, this hearing concerns protective, need not criminal trial standards. Judge Graves looked toward him calmly. And credibility affects protective, need counselor. Vance sat back down slowly. Victor watched Natalie carefully now. Her breathing remained controlled, but the timing between breaths had changed, slightly shorter. Rebecca continued. We also recovered independent hallway surveillance footage. That finally shifted the room fully. Judge Graves looked up. Independent footage. Yes, Your Honor. Rebecca played the video, timestamp visible. Natalie entering Victor's apartment at 1:13 a.m. using a key. 7 minutes inside. Ryan Mercer visible near the hallway intersection. Watching both stairwells. The courtroom fell silent. Even Leonard Vance stopped writing. Judge Graves leaned forward slightly. When was this recovered? Privately archived and preserved before disclosure concerns arose. Authenticity verified, yes. Forensic certification pending final submission, but preliminary authentication complete. Natalie's expression changed then. Very slightly. Not fear yet, but pressure. Real pressure. Rebecca stepped back towards the counsel table. Your Honor, the petitioner omitted this entry from all sworn statements. Judge Graves looked directly at Natalie. Miss Brooks, did you enter Mr. Patterson's apartment after filing allegations? Natalie spoke carefully. I still had belongings there. Why was that omitted? Natalie hesitated. Leonard Vance immediately stood again. My client was under emotional distress. Judge Graves raised one hand. Sit down, counselor. He sat. The judge returned her attention to Natalie. You understand? Omissions affecting evidentiary interpretation are serious. Natalie nodded quietly. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Graves looked toward Rebecca. What about the knife evidence? Rebecca opened another folder. Forensic review identified the petitioner's fingerprints on evidence packaging materials. This time, even the bailiff glanced up. Natalie's jaw tightened briefly. Victor remained motionless beside Rebecca. Judge Graves folded her hands together slowly. Miss Brooks, how exactly did your fingerprints appear on evidence allegedly hidden by Mr. Patterson's silence? Long silence. Natalie finally answered, I touched things in the apartment. Rebecca immediately stepped forward. Wrapped inside a clean towel with no kitchen residue present, Natalie said nothing. Judge Graves looked toward Leonard Vance. Counselor Vance stood carefully now. No confidence left in his posture. Your Honor, we acknowledge there appear to be evidentiary complexities requiring further review. Rebecca almost smiled. Complexities. Interesting choice of words. Judge Graves turned pages slowly through the evidence binder. Then another document caught her attention. "What is this?" Rebecca answered immediately. "Phone location analysis for Ryan Mercer." Judge Graves read quietly, then looked up sharply. "He was near the apartment during the alleged concealment period." "Yes, Your Honor." "And connected to the petitioner socially and professionally." "Yes." Now the structure became impossible to ignore. Not isolated accusation, coordination, pattern, potential conspiracy. Judge Graves removed her glasses slowly. The courtroom had become completely silent now. Victor noticed something else too. Natalie was no longer looking at the judge or her attorney. She kept glancing toward the courtroom exit, like someone calculating escape routes emotionally rather than physically. Judge Graves finally spoke. "Miss Brooks, were any of these allegations fabricated or manipulated in coordination with another party?" Natalie's eyes widened slightly. "No." Rebecca stepped forward one final time. "Then perhaps Your Honor would appreciate this." She placed another certified document onto the bench. "Bank transfer records, Evergreen Housing Initiative accounts, payments routed toward Ryan Mercer." Judge Graves frowned immediately. "What am I looking at?" Rebecca's voice remained calm. "Unexplained transfers totaling $11,400 over 6 weeks. Leonard Vance stood instantly. "Objection! Overruled," Judge Graves said flatly. Rebecca continued. "Transfers occurred during the same timeline. Evidence fabrication has escalated." The courtroom atmosphere changed completely. Not civil hearing anymore. Something heavier now. Potential criminal exposure. Judge Graves stared toward Natalie Brooks for several seconds, then asked the question that finally cracked the structure completely. "Miss Brooks, who exactly was helping you?" Natalie opened her mouth. Nothing came out. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, Victor Patterson watched the certainty leave her face. The silence after Judge Eleanor Graves' question lasted almost 7 seconds, long enough for everybody in courtroom 4B to feel it, long enough for the structure of Natalie Brooks' story to begin collapsing under its own weight. "Miss Brooks," Judge Graves repeated calmly. "Who assisted you?" Natalie stared at the edge of the counsel table without answering. Beside her, Leonard Vance shifted uncomfortably for the first time since the hearing began. His legal pad remained untouched now. No more polished objections, no more controlled courtroom rhythm. Because the hearing was no longer about fear. It was about fabrication. Rebecca Sloan stood motionless beside Victor Patterson, while Daniel Ruiz remained near the rear courtroom wall beside Detective Laura Bennett. Victor watched Natalie carefully. Not emotionally, observationally. The same way he once watched compromised informants overseas before they broke under conflicting timelines. Tiny details mattered. Natalie's breathing had become irregular. Right shoulder tense. Eyes avoiding direct focus. No longer performing toward the judge. Now calculating consequences. Judge Graves leaned back slowly. "Miss Brooks' failure to answer may carry legal implications depending on evidentiary findings." Natalie finally looked up. "I was scared." The sentence sounded rehearsed. Too late. Too broad. Judge Graves remained expressionless, scared of what Natalie swallowed once. "Victor." Rebecca spoke immediately. "Then why enter his apartment after midnight voluntarily?" Natalie froze again. Another fracture. Leonard Vance stood carefully. "Your Honor, my client has been under substantial Emotional pressure. Judge Graves cut him off sharply. Your client submitted manipulated evidence to this court. The room went still again. Natalie looked toward her attorney quickly now, searching, but Vance had already begun distancing himself professionally. Victor recognized the shift immediately. Counselors defended uncertainty. They abandoned contamination. Judge Graves turned toward Rebecca. You mentioned a forensic review. Rebecca nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. She opened another folder. Yesterday evening, digital forensic analysts completed preliminary extraction from Ryan Mercer's cloud backups. That caught everybody's attention instantly. Even Natalie's composure slipped visibly now. Rebecca continued calmly. Recovered deleted messages indicate coordination regarding image editing, timeline construction, and apartment access. Leonard Vance closed his eyes briefly. Done. The case was done. Rebecca handed printed copies to the bailiff for judicial review. Judge Graves read silently. Then her expression hardened. These messages explicitly reference placing the knife before police arrive. No one spoke. Natalie's face lost color. Victor remained still. Judge Graves looked up slowly. Miss Brooks, were you aware Mr. Mercer retained these communications? Natalie whispered something too softly to hear. Speak clearly, the judge ordered. Natalie's voice cracked slightly this time. No. That single word changed everything. Not because of emotion, because truth had finally appeared accidentally. No. Not denial of fabrication. Denial of knowing evidence survived. Rebecca stepped forward again. There's more. Judge Graves nodded. Rebecca displayed enlarged text exchanges on the courtroom monitor. Ryan. You sure he won't see this coming? Natalie. Quiet men never fight back until it's too late. Another message. Natalie. Once police find the knife, nobody will care about details. The courtroom atmosphere turned heavy. Not dramatic. Worse. Quiet. The kind of silence people carried home afterward. Victor watched the messages without visible reaction. But internally, something settled permanently. Not vindication. Confirmation. Natalie had not acted impulsively. She had planned destruction carefully. Judge Graves removed her glasses slowly. Miss Brooks, she said, do you understand the seriousness of fabricated evidence submitted to law enforcement and this court? Natalie's eyes filled slightly now. Not grief. Fear. Real fear. Leonard Vance finally spoke quietly beside her. Natalie, you need to answer honestly. Too late for strategy now. Too late for narrative management. The procedural structure had closed completely around the lie. Natalie looked toward the courtroom exit again. Victor noticed that immediately, still searching for escape psychologically, not legally. Rebecca opened the final folder. Your Honor, we also received certified financial review from Evergreen Housing Initiative. Judge Graves looked tired suddenly. What now? Rebecca placed bank statements onto the bench. Funds were diverted from discretionary outreach accounts into payments routed toward Ryan Mercer. Leonard Vance stared downward. Natalie closed her eyes briefly. Rebecca continued. The timing aligns directly with evidence fabrication activities. Judge Graves looked toward Detective Bennett near the rear wall. Detective, has criminal review begun? Bennett answered calmly. Yes, Your Honor. Natalie's breathing changed again. Shorter now. More visible. Judge Graves folded both hands together. Then this hearing has moved far beyond restraining order considerations. No one argued, because everyone knew she was right. The judge looked directly at Natalie Brooks. The petition for protective order is denied. The words landed heavily through the courtroom. Natalie lowered her head immediately. Judge Graves continued. Additionally, this matter is formally referred to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office for review of false reporting evidence, tampering, conspiracy, and potential fraud-related offenses. The courtroom murmured quietly. Victor remained motionless. Not relief, not satisfaction, only stillness. Judge Graves looked toward Victor then. For the first time during the hearing, Mr. Patterson, Victor stood calmly. You have conducted yourself with considerable restraint throughout this process. Victor nodded once. Nothing more. The judge continued. That restraint may have prevented substantial procedural damage. Rebecca glanced toward him briefly. Most men falsely accused in public hearings exploded emotionally once vindicated. Victor Patterson simply stood there quietly in his old Navy suit while the system corrected itself piece by piece. And somehow that silence carried more weight than anger ever could. Judge Graves adjourned the hearing. People began standing slowly. Whispers moved immediately through the gallery. Phones appeared. Messages started traveling. Natalie remained seated several seconds longer than everyone else, like her body no longer understood how to move inside the collapse. Leonard Vance leaned toward her quietly. Victor could not hear the words, but he recognized the posture. Legal withdrawal. Then it happened. Detective Laura Bennett approached the counsel table with two uniformed officers behind her. Natalie Brooks Bennett said calmly, "Please stand." The courtroom froze again. Natalie looked up slowly, fear fully visible now. "What? You are being detained pending formal charging review involving evidence tampering and false reporting." Leonard Vance closed his briefcase silently. No objections, no speeches, nothing left to protect. Natalie looked around the courtroom wildly for a second. Then her eyes landed on Victor. First time directly since the hearing began. Victor met her gaze calmly. No hatred, no victory, just truth, finally standing where lies had been. Natalie's voice broke. "You knew," Victor answered quietly. "I documented." That hurt her more, because it reduced the entire collapse to something simple. Not revenge, not power, not manipulation, documentation, procedure, structure. The officers placed handcuffs gently around Natalie's wrists. Gasps moved quietly through the courtroom gallery. One reporter near the back immediately rushed toward the hallway exit with phone already raised. News was spreading now, fast. Natalie turned once more toward Victor as officers guided her toward the courtroom doors. For a second, she looked less angry than confused, as if she still could not understand why the story failed. Victor understood perfectly, because she built her case around emotion. And Victor Patterson had spent most of his life building defenses around evidence. As Natalie disappeared into the hallway, Daniel Ruiz stepped beside Victor quietly. Neither spoke immediately. Then Daniel finally said, "She really thought nobody would check." Victor picked up the thick black evidence binder slowly. She thought emotion would arrive first. Daniel looked toward the empty courtroom doors. And it almost worked. Victor nodded once. "Yes." Silence settled between them. Then Daniel glanced sideways. "You okay?" Victor looked around the nearly empty courtroom. The polished wood, the scattered papers, the space where Natalie had sat only minutes earlier. Then he answered honestly, "No." That surprised Daniel. Victor continued quietly, "Because false accusations don't disappear when disproven." And standing there inside courtroom 4B, Daniel realized that might be the truest thing spoken during the entire hearing. The rain returned 3 days later. Not heavy, just the thin, cold Portland drizzle that seemed to hang permanently in the air between October and April. Victor Patterson stood outside Columbia River Freight Systems at 5:12 p.m. watching water bead along the hood of his old Ford F-150. The freight yard looked exactly the same as before. Forklifts moving, trailers backing into docks, security lights buzzing above wet pavement. But the atmosphere around him had changed completely. People nodded now when he walked past. Some avoided eye contact out of embarrassment. Others suddenly tried too hard to be friendly. Both reactions irritated Victor equally. Doug Henley met him near the security office entrance carrying a folded document. "Corporate approved your return immediately," Doug said awkwardly. Victor took the paper without reading it. "You didn't have to come back this fast." Victor looked toward the loading yard. "Routine matters." Doug nodded slowly. Neither mentioned the suspension directly. They didn't need to. Inside the break room, conversations lowered slightly when Victor entered. Tyler Jensen stood immediately. "Victor, man, I just want to say," Victor stopped him with a small motion of his hand. "Don't." Tyler frowned. "We should have backed you earlier." Victor opened his locker calmly. "You followed what you thought was safest." The words were not angry. That somehow made them worse. Melissa looked down into her coffee cup quietly. Nobody spoke after that. Victor changed into his security jacket and clipped his badge back onto his belt. Same routine, same thermos, same flashlight. But now every person in the room understood something they hadn't before. The quiet man they overlooked had survived because he prepared while everyone else reacted. At 8:40 p.m., Daniel Ruiz arrived at the freight yard in plain clothes. Victor found him standing beside the perimeter fence, watching freight trucks disappear into the rain. "You off duty?" Victor asked. Daniel nodded. "Needed air." Victor stood beside him silently. The river smelled faintly of diesel and wet steel nearby. Daniel shoved both hands into his coat pockets. "I testified in 3 follow-up interviews this week." Victor waited. "Internal affairs, too." Victor glanced sideways briefly. "Because of me." Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "Because procedure touched somebody politically connected." That part had started surfacing publicly now. Evergreen Housing Initiative had frozen several financial accounts pending review. Auditors discovered irregular discretionary transfers connected to Ryan Mercer's department access privileges. The case was expanding beyond false accusations, potential fraud, misuse of nonprofit funds, digital tampering. And once financial investigators arrived, small lies rarely stayed small. Daniel looked toward the warehouse lights. "You know what scares me most?" Victor waited. "I almost trusted the story because it fit emotionally." Victor nodded once. "That's normal." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No. What scares me is how close the system came to failing, because the lie sounded cleaner than the truth." Rain tapped softly against the chain-link fence between them. Victor finally spoke. "Systems fail when people Stop verifying. Daniel looked toward him carefully. You always talk like this. That almost made Daniel smile. Almost. After a long silence, Daniel asked quietly, "Why leave military intelligence?" Victor looked toward the dark river beyond the freight yard. Too much deception eventually changes people. Daniel waited. Victor rarely volunteered personal thoughts. When you spend years investigating lies, Victor continued quietly, you stop hearing conversations normally. What do you mean? You stop listening emotionally. Victor's eyes stayed fixed ahead. You start listening structurally. Daniel absorbed that silently. Victor continued. You notice timing before tone, sequence before emotion, contradictions before sympathy. Daniel looked down briefly. That sounds exhausting. It is. Another silence followed. Then Daniel finally asked the question he'd wanted to ask since the courtroom hearing. Did you ever love Natalie? Victor did not answer immediately. Rain moved softly through the freight yard lights around them. Then finally, yes. Daniel frowned slightly. Even after all this, Victor looked toward the loading docks. Love and trust are different systems. The answer stayed with Daniel long after. At 10:15 p.m., Victor returned to the security office and found a large white envelope waiting beside the monitor desk. No return address. Inside sat a handwritten letter. Rebecca Sloan had forwarded it from her office. Victor unfolded the paper carefully. Captain Patterson. My name is Eric Holloway. I served with the 82nd Airborne until 2019. My ex-wife accused me of threatening her during our custody case. I lost visitation for 8 months before evidence cleared me. Rebecca told me what happened to you. Most people don't understand what false accusations actually do to someone. Even after you're cleared, people remember the accusation first. I heard you kept records, stayed calm, survived it without destroying yourself. I don't know why, but reading about your case made me feel less alone. Victor read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. Not because of praise, because of recognition. He understood every sentence in it. At midnight, rain intensified again. Victor walked the warehouse perimeter alone, beneath floodlights reflecting off soaked asphalt. His flashlight beam moved slowly along the fence line, while freight trains groaned somewhere near the river tracks. Routine again. But internally, something had shifted. Not relief. Relief implied completion. This was something else. Understanding. False accusations did not end when evidence won. They remained attached to memory permanently. Some people would always remember his name connected to police investigations before remembering the truth afterward. Victor accepted that because reality mattered more than reputation. Reality survived longer. At 1:30 a.m., his phone buzzed. Rebecca Sloan. Victor answered immediately. You're awake, she said. I'm working. Good. Because I have updates. Victor leaned against the security desk quietly. Go ahead. Ryan Mercer accepted a cooperation agreement. Victor closed his eyes briefly. Expected. What did he give them? Everything. Rebecca sounded tired. According to prosecutors, Natalie initiated the entire structure after discovering your military savings and retirement accounts. Victor remained silent. She believed a domestic violence filing would pressure you into settlement agreements and property concessions. Victor stared through the office window toward the rain. Not shock, just confirmation. Rebecca continued. Ryan handled digital fabrication because she promised him money from nonprofit diversion accounts. Victor said nothing. Rebecca's voice softened slightly. You okay? Victor answered honestly. She planned my destruction financially before emotionally. A long pause followed. Then Rebecca said quietly, Yes. Victor looked down at Eric Holloway's folded letter sitting beside the monitor keyboard. What charges? He finally asked. False reporting, evidence tampering, fraud. Conspiracy, potential felony enhancement because of coordinated fabrication. Victor nodded once. Rebecca hesitated. There's something else. Victor waited. She told investigators she chose you because quiet men look guilty once they stop defending themselves. Victor looked toward the rain outside, then slowly picked up the folded letter again. She was wrong, he said quietly. Rebecca exhaled softly on the other end. No, she replied. She underestimated the difference between silence and preparation. The call ended several seconds later. Victor stood alone inside the dim security office while freight trucks rolled through the wet darkness beyond the windows. Then he unfolded Eric Holloway's letter once more. And for the first time since the police knocked on his apartment door at 6:14 that morning, weeks ago, Victor Patterson began thinking not about surviving the accusation, but about helping the next man survive his. 6 months later, Portland looked different in the sunlight. The rain still came often, but spring had pushed color back into the city. Trees along the waterfront carried fresh green leaves, and outdoor tables slowly returned to sidewalks near Northwest Everett and Burnside. Victor Patterson still woke at 4:12 every afternoon, still bought coffee at the same Chevron station, still drove the same rusted 2008 Ford F-150 with the cracked taillight and faded paint. Most habits remained unchanged, but his life no longer belonged entirely to silence. At 9 a.m. every Saturday, a small office near Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard opened its doors beneath a simple brass sign, Patterson and Sloan Veterans Legal Support. No polished branding, no advertisements. Just 2 rooms, old hardwood floors, second-hand furniture, and a waiting area that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Rebecca Sloan handled the legal structure. Victor handled the men who walked through the door carrying invisible damage. Most arrived cautiously, some angry, some embarrassed, most exhausted. False accusations had a way of isolating people long before courts ever became involved. Victor understood that better than anyone. Inside the office, shelves lined the walls with binders labeled carefully. Timelines, documentation, digital preservation, custody procedure, evidence, retention. Victor built the system himself. Simple, organized, reliable. Because frightened people needed structure before they could think clearly again. At 10:14 that morning, Eric Holloway arrived carrying a cardboard file box under one arm. Former Army Sergeant, 32, still carrying tension in his shoulders, even while standing still. Victor shook his hand once and gestured toward the conference table. Eric looked around quietly. You really built this? Victor sat across from him. Yes. Eric exhaled slowly. I thought after everything happened to me, nobody would believe me again. Victor opened a notebook calmly. People believe evidence eventually. Eric gave a tired laugh. That takes time. Yes. Victor's answer carried no false comfort, only truth. Rebecca emerged from her office carrying printed custody paperwork. Morning, Eric. He nodded politely. Rebecca looked toward Victor. You already start him on documentation, yes. Eric stared at the growing stack of organized forms beside him. You guys really treat this like an investigation, Victor answered quietly. It is one. Outside the office window, traffic rolled slowly along Hawthorne, while rain clouds gathered over the river again. Life continued. Always. That part surprised Victor more than anything. The world never stopped moving simply because somebody's life nearly collapsed. At noon, Daniel Ruiz arrived carrying a cardboard tray with 4 coffees balanced carefully in both hands. No uniform today, just jeans and a dark jacket. He stepped inside the office and looked around with quiet approval. This place still smells like military paperwork. Rebecca smirked faintly. That's Victor's influence. Daniel handed out coffee cups. Victor's already had 2 hazelnut creamers inside without needing explanation. Routine mattered. Daniel sat beside the front window while Eric organized his files nearby. For several minutes, nobody spoke much. Comfortable silence. The rare kind. Finally, Daniel looked toward Victor. You know, Internal Affairs used your case in procedural review training. Victor glanced up from a file. No. They called it a breakdown in assumption-based investigation. Rebecca smiled faintly. That's a very diplomatic phrase. Daniel shrugged. Translation: too many officers trusted narrative pressure over verification. Victor said nothing. Daniel watched him for a second. You ever think about how close this came to destroying everything Victor organized? Another document carefully before answering. Yes. And that doesn't make you angry. Victor paused briefly, then looked toward the office shelves lined with case files. Anger doesn't help the next person. That answer settled quietly into the room. Eric stared down into his coffee cup afterward, like he was trying to memorize the sentence. Around 2 p.m., Rebecca received another update from prosecutors. Natalie Brooks had accepted a plea agreement. Ryan Mercer, too. No prison sentences yet finalized, but felony convictions remained likely. Fraud charges connected to Evergreen Housing Funds had expanded the case farther than anyone expected. Rebecca looked toward Victor after hanging up. You want details? Victor shook his head once. No. Rebecca studied him carefully. You really don't care. Victor looked out the rain-speckled office window. That part ended already. And it had. Natalie no longer occupied emotional space inside him. Not because he forgave her, because survival required closing certain doors completely. At 4:30 p.m., Victor locked the office for the evening and drove toward Columbia River Freight Systems. Still the same part-time night security shifts 3 days a week. People asked why he kept the job now that donations and legal support funding had started arriving. Victor always answered the same way. Routine matters. The freight yard looked almost identical to the night police first knocked on his apartment door months earlier. Floodlights, shipping containers, wet asphalt, the same long shadows stretching between loading docks. Victor walked the perimeter fence with his flashlight and small black notebook. Same habit, same measured pace. Only now younger guards followed his documentation routines too. Tyler Jensen logged gate irregularities carefully. Melissa archived footage backups twice. Procedure had spread quietly through the department. Not because Victor lectured anyone, because they finally understood why small details mattered. At 2:17 a.m., Victor stopped near the river fence line and looked across the dark water toward downtown Portland, glowing softly beneath low clouds. His phone buzzed. Message from Rebecca. Tomorrow's intake schedule is full again. Victor read the message twice before putting the phone away. Full again. More men. More accusations. More destroyed reputations waiting for systems to catch up with truth. The realization sat heavily inside him, but not hopelessly. Victor looked down at the small black notebook in his hand, then slowly wrote one sentence beneath the night's perimeter notes. Truth survives structure. He closed the notebook afterward and continued walking beneath the floodlights. Same truck, same coffee, same quiet life. But now people finally understood something they missed the first time they looked at Victor Patterson. Silence was never weakness. Sometimes silence was preparation. And sometimes the calmest man in the room was the one who already knew exactly how truth would eventually stand back up on its own. In the end, Victor Patterson never won because he shouted louder than Natalie Brooks. He won because he stayed steady while everyone else chased emotion. He understood something most people forget. When fear and anger take over, facts matter more than panic, and patience often protects people better than rage ever can. A lot of people watching this story probably know what it feels like to be misunderstood, falsely judged, or treated like the villain before anyone checked the truth. And once suspicion touches your name, even briefly, it leaves marks behind. That's why preparation, documentation, and emotional control matter so much in real life. Quiet people are often underestimated because they don't perform strength publicly. But strength does not always look loud. If you've ever been falsely accused, unfairly judged, or forced to defend yourself, while nobody listened at first, share your story in the comments. And tell us your country and local time too. Stories like this remind people they are not alone. And if you enjoy slow burn stories where truth fights its way back piece by piece, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story involves a father, a courtroom, and a secret bank account nobody was supposed to discover.